Published 3:32 Eastern Daylight Saving Time, the 17th of October 2018. Updated 6:47 Eastern Daylight Saving Time, the 17th of October 2018. Theresa May will hold crucial private talks with Donald Tusk, Jean-Claude Juncker and Leo Varadkar before her crunch speech to EU leaders tonight. The Prime Minister will hope to pave the way for an 11th-hour breakthrough amid little hopes of progress on a breakthrough on a deal at today's summit. Mrs. May will fly to Brussels after PMQs today for the new round of high-stakes diplomacy amid warnings failure will bring a no-deal exit closer. Mr. Juncker and EU negotiator Michel Barnier met in Brussels this morning as part of routine Commission business ahead of this afternoon's crunch talks. Mr. Tusk yesterday demanded Mrs. May bring concrete new proposals with her to Brussels as fears rise failure could mean a no-deal Brexit. Brussels is offering to extend transition by a year to 2021 in a bid to make its proposal on the Irish backstop more palatable to UK. Currently Britain is due to quit EU rules on December 31, 2020, almost 2 years after Brexit Day itself on March 29, 2019. The EU hopes to persuade Britain along transition means the backstop will never kick in and end fears about how it would work. Theresa May, pictured today in Downing Street, and Donald Tusk will hold private talks today before the Prime Minister's make-or-break pitch for a Brexit deal. Mr. Juncker and EU negotiator Michel Barnier met in Brussels this morning, pictured as part of regular Commission business ahead of this afternoon's crunch talks. Today's summit was long planned as the moment to strike a Brexit deal, but talks look likely to go down to the wire of a final summit in December. Ahead of the meetings in Brussels, Chancellor Philip Hammond warned Britain will still owe most of its £39 billion divorce bill, infuriating Brexiteers who want to withhold the money if there is no trade deal. The EU idea to extend transition is intended to create time and space for a solution on the Irish border, Irish Foreign Minister Simon Coveney said in an interview with RTE. It would mean a two-stage backstop where a UK-wide customs union exists alongside a customs union and single market for Northern Ireland. The idea will be opposed by the DUP, which props up Mrs. May in power. An EU diplomat told the FT, "The extension is an example of how we could be flexible to help the British side if they want it." Downing Street did not deny the idea was under discussion, but sources insisted there was no change to the UK position and Britain is not proposing to extend transition beyond December 2020. Mr. Tusk, pictured yesterday in Brussels, has demanded Mrs. May bring concrete new proposals with her to Brussels as fears rise failure could mean a no-deal Brexit. Both sides will be desperate to avoid a furious collapse in talks which marred the last gathering of EU leaders in Austria last month. A UK official told Politico, "We just do not have time for another breakdown." And a German official told the FT, "We are still on track for that to conclude talks next month. There is an EU summit already scheduled for December, so we don't need to schedule a new one." Mrs. May's spokesman said the PM would use her speech tonight to set out the areas where progress had been achieved while stressing her commitment to finding an agreement. He said, "We want to secure a deal as quickly as possible. We think it is in the best interests of the UK and European Union to forge that deep future partnership. Significant issues need to be resolved before a Brexit deal can be agreed." Irish Deputy Prime Minister Simon Coveney, pictured last month, said today significant issues need to be resolved before a Brexit deal can be agreed. Mr. Coveney said today. He told BBC Radio 4's Today programme, "A lot of work has happened over the last 2 weeks that have actually found ways of closing gaps and getting agreement, but there are a small number of remaining issues. They are significant issues, so we shouldn't downplay them, that need to be resolved." He added, "What Michel Barnier is now suggesting is, look, let's ensure that the backstop is never likely to be used by creating the space and time for the UK and the EU to be able to negotiate UK-wide customs arrangements that can ensure that there won't ever be the need for customs checks between Britain and Northern Ireland, which I know is a genuine concern amongst unionists. In Ireland we don't want that either." The Chancellor told cabinet ministers yesterday, when he is pictured, that the UK would be unlikely to win a legal battle to avoid paying a large proportion of the Brexit bill. Theresa May will travel to Brussels after PMQs today and a day after meeting her cabinet for marathon talks on the state of the negotiations. She pleaded with her senior team to stand together as she braced for a frantic 48 hours battling to get negotiations back on track. But while Mrs. May managed to stave off the threat of potentially disastrous resignations, ministers laid down a marker against conceding too much. Mr. Hammond's intervention came despite previous statements by Brexit Secretary Dominic Raab, seen yesterday, that the UK would refuse to pay the cash if no trade deal was reached. Ministers including Esther McVey and Andrea Leadsom are said to have voiced alarm at the idea of not including a hard end date in the UK's backstop proposals. Several ministers demanded legal advice on anything agreed with the EU amid anger at last year's agreement in principle on a backstop for the Irish border turning into the issue which has deadlocked talks. According to Downing Street, Mrs. May told the session that progress was being made in talks and she could get an outcome that honoured the referendum result and did not risk splitting the UK. "I'm convinced that if we as a government stand together and stand firm we can achieve this," she said. The Chancellor told cabinet ministers yesterday that the UK would be unlikely to win a legal battle to avoid paying a large proportion of the Brexit bill, and could only save between £3 billion and £9 billion, a cabinet source told The Telegraph. He said that the Treasury's legal advice was that, if we left without a deal we would still have to pay the EU £30 minus £36 billion because we would be unlikely to win any case that went to international arbitration. The comments sparked anger among Eurosceptics, who called Mr. Hammond's tactics mystifying. When the cabinet met yesterday, everyone was clear that the Irish border is the issue holding up Brexit negotiations. The concept of a backstop, to avoid a hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic whatever the future trade relationship, was agreed by both sides in December last year. But they have dramatically different idea on how the mechanism would work, which have given rise to two distinct sticking points. Border in the Irish Sea. Brussels says the only way of avoiding a hard border is for Northern Ireland to stay under its customs jurisdiction. Under the model, the province would also follow single market rules to avoid the need for checks. But Mrs. May says that would be unacceptable as it would split up the UK. Ministers are unanimous in opposing anything that splits the UK, and made clear that the PM cannot agree anything that puts the Union at risk. Credible exit plan from EU customs rules. The PM is trying to break the deadlock by proposing a new backstop arrangement for the Irish border. The blueprint could mean the whole UK staying in the EU customs union temporarily and accepting regulatory checks between mainland Britain and Northern Ireland. Brussels seems implacably opposed to having a hard end date written into the deal. As a result, the government is mooting a break clause that would ensure the customs arrangement will end, without explicitly stating when. Some cabinet ministers and Tory MPs fear that in reality this could keep the UK subject to Brussels rules indefinitely. But they are thought to be holding off until they see the final shape of the proposal.